I am Mariel Reed. I'm CEO of Pavilion and a former public servant. And as I said, really excited that you're all here. The reason we're doing this webinar is really simple. We've seen that the way suppliers grow in the public sector market is changing, and a lot of the playbooks that worked a few years ago just aren't working as well anymore. So I'm excited today to dig into what's actually changing, and more importantly, what the businesses, the suppliers who are still growing, are doing differently to adapt to some of those changes. And we have two of the most thoughtful operators in this market with us today, and they're both HGACBuy awarded suppliers as well. So we'll introduce them in just a moment, but Pavilion is proud to be co-hosting this session with HGACBuy. And I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself. And I know, again, we have HGACBuy awarded suppliers in the house. They have some context, obviously, on you guys, but I know you have a lot on what's the latest and greatest as well.
Yes, I just want to say thank you, Mariel, for this, and welcome HGACBuy awarded suppliers. As you are a part of the HGACBuy family, we're a nationwide cooperative purchasing program. We've been serving the local communities nationwide for over 50 years. Can you believe it? 50 years. We have over 10,000 members, and just to give you a little numbers, you all have sold pretty much $3 billion through our co-op in 2025. So with that being said, HGACBuy suppliers, we want to thank you. Thank you for joining this webinar where you can learn best practices. And with that being said, I'm going to hand it right back to you, Mariel, and let's get it going.
Cool. I'll cover a couple logistics. First of all, this webinar is being recorded. So I know some folks weren't able to make it or had team members that you wanted to share the session with. If you registered, it will be recorded and we can send you the link afterwards or some snippets as well. And then we also are very open to your questions and comments. So you'll see we're going to have a conversation with each other, but we hope it's a relatively small group. So we hope it can be in conversation with you all as well. So as you have questions or experiences that you want to share being operators yourselves, please feel free to add those in the chat, or there's a questions like a Q&A feature as well. And we'll dedicate some time at the end to questions as well. So with that, let me hand it over to our speakers to introduce themselves as well. So Shannon, why don't you kick it off?
All right. Thanks for having me. My name's Shannon Russell. I am the VP of Public Sector for Robert Half. I've been with Robert Half for 18 years, and our public sector practice essentially focuses on local government and education, and we provide staffing services within accounting and finance, IT, administrative, clerical, and customer service, as well as legal and marketing, digital, and creative. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. Ryan, over to you.
Thanks, Mariel. And so Robert Half is the mothership for Protiviti. We're about a 12,000 person consulting firm. I'm a managing director in our public sector practice, one of our regional leaders. For Protiviti, public sector is state and local government, education, and nonprofit. But we help our clients transform their operations, respond to events like policy changes, economic events, or technology disruptions, and also protect things like their assets, data, and ultimately the reputations.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Okay, so very quickly, an orientation onto how the next 40 or so minutes will go. We'll spend most of our time in conversation with Shannon and Ryan about what's changed in their go-to-market motion and what they're doing about it. And I'll also do a very short demo of Pavilion in the middle so you can see how some of what they're describing works in practice. And then, as I shared before, we'll close with some Q&A and discussion. So feel free to drop questions in the chat for us anytime. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my slides and we'll jump into conversation. So just want to frame the central tension that we're going to spend most of our discussion on. I think, as many of you know, responding to RFPs feels like table stakes. Pretty much every supplier in the public sector does it, has to do it. But many of the suppliers who are actually really growing right now have figured out that by the time an RFP hits the street, a lot of that important work around shaping the requirements, building relationships with the buyers, helping the agency really understand what they actually need has already happened. And if you weren't part of those conversations, you might be competing on price against people who were. As a friend put it to me the other day, RFPs feel a little bit like babies. If you weren't there 9 months ago, it might not be yours. At the same time, I think the channels that used to fill the top of funnel are getting harder. Conferences cost more. In chatting with procurement teams that are organizing some of those conferences, I know they're feeling this pain too. And they're seeing fewer of the right people oftentimes attend. Cold outbound is harder. Folks are inundated with email and calls all the time, so it's harder to cut through the noise. And team time has really never been more expensive. So the key question that we really want to spend time on today is, what are the suppliers who are growing quickly actually doing differently? And I wanted to start with a quick prompt to each of you. So Shannon, let's start with you, but really hoping you can share one thing about selling to public sector that's meaningfully different today than, say, like 3 years ago. What do you see that's changing?
Yeah, I would say over the past really 3 to 5 years in public sector, it's not much different than private sector in the fact that those employees are having to do more with less, with far less resources. And so that includes the resources and time that they're able to spend in crafting an RFP. I have seen so many RFPs. The average time frame takes 9 months. We've even had an experience just last week where we had submitted to an RFP. It was over 140 pages, only to find after our submission that they canceled the RFP. So I think just the time and resources or lack thereof is really, I think, has been the number one change in selling to public sector. In addition, even if we're awarded an RFP, there's no guarantee that that's going to create any sort of revenue for your organization.
Hmm.
And I've seen a rise in cooperative purchasing, and so there's a lot more willingness for public sector entities to leverage a cooperative to be able to partner with us. In fact, we actually had an entity in the state of Washington that they awarded a smaller vendor that was a competitor of ours through an RFP. We didn't win the RFP.
Hmm.
However, prior to that, we had let them know that we were awarded a contract through HGACBuy, and that vendor was unable to deliver. So they came to us, and we now have an agreement through HGAC. So
Great.
I think just leveraging that to, and focusing in on their time is what's changed a lot for
Hmm.
us.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. I think I want to come back to the idea that cooperatives are becoming a tool to kind of solve the resource crunch, and not just to kind of avoid procurement. And I love that example that you shared in Washington. And congrats on the deal. But first, Ryan, same question to you. What's something that you've observed that's meaningfully changed or feels different today than it did, 3 to 5 years ago?
Yeah, I'll take a thread that Shannon left out there on the canceled RFPs. it- we see more and more now that do get canceled, or they extend the timeline out extensively, usually through the Q&A process. And uh, what my observation is, I think, is a lot of agencies, a lot of organizations are becoming overwhelmed with the questions that are coming in. A lot of the procurements that come out now, in our world, the services world, are related to technology transformations and a lot of AI work, right? So I think one of the things that these organizations find when they open it up to Q&A is perhaps they haven't thought through everything that maybe they should have considered when they opened up this opportunity. And so the Q&A is informative for them, but it often results in canceled procurements.
Hmm.
So we're trying to find different ways to kind of move upstream and find relationships. And to your point, the co-ops are great. We try and introduce those really as often as we can, to kind of just make the conversation simpler. One of those elements would be, just making sure that we kind of compartmentalize the conversations that we're having with our buyers. And so, when we're talking with folks who we know need a solution, are the direct recipients of a solution, it's important that we don't overwhelm that person with the details of the procurement process. And so we'll often introduce the fact that we've got folks that do this all the time, and if they'd like to introduce us to their procurement team, we're happy to have those conversations separately, rather than weighing down the entire buying decision, with things like legal terms and processes that they have to follow from a compliance perspective. We try and keep the solution from the purchasing process very independent through that phase.
Awesome. Yeah, so it sounds like the it resonates with the actual work of shaping the requirements is happening before the RFP. And sometimes, unfortunately, it happens during the RFP process or when the RFP is out there and results in canceled RFPs. I think we hear from a lot of the suppliers out there and our procurement users as well that having that cooperative in place allows you to be part of kind of shaping the scope. So again, to the point of like, hey, can you get upstream? Can you do that work of shaping the project before the RFP happens, or maybe even avoid the RFP altogether if there's a cooperative option that you can introduce? And I think the point, Ryan, that you had around being better or focusing on distinguishing between, we call them like the champion, who's that person in an end user department who has kind of budget authority, who knows about the solution that they want, versus like your procurement stakeholder, keeping those conversations like specific to those stakeholders matters a lot. I think we still see folks struggle with how and when to introduce the fact that you have that cooperative procurement option as kind of an off ramp or a differentiator in conversations with champions, because a lot of times those champions actually don't understand their own agency's procurement process and might be kind of overwhelmed by it as well. So we see that a lot too, and it's something I feel like we should do a future webinar entirely on, just like how to handle champions versus procurement, because I think a lot of battle stories, certainly from my own time in public service there, of like, oh, like if only you had said these words to that stakeholder instead of this other stakeholder, we would have avoided so much pain. So I think you're right that overall the ecosystem is getting a lot savvier on cooperative purchasing, but still there is this kind of awareness gap between the procurement teams who are super savvy and know all about cooperatives versus like those champion and budget holders. So I want to go deeper into the upstream theme that we've been talking about. And Ryan, I really want to start with you here because I know that you've got a story that I think captures this pretty well, and in fact is one that's heavily influenced Pavilion's overall product direction, which I certainly want to credit you and kind of sharing this feedback with us about. So can you share? I know you have a great example from a large state agency, but curious to hear about that time where you were able to really get upstream and how that worked.
Yeah, so I think you're asking about the large licensing agency that we had a win with last year. And, I think this was an example where, working with Casey, our customer success manager, we're trying to figure out how do we get a hold of opportunities before they go to RFP or before, they've kind of really been formalized into another path. And we started getting some insights from you all last year, which was really impactful. In this particular case, you all had a buyer who had a pattern of search terms that aligned very tightly with some services that we offered at Protiviti, and gave us a heads up, said, hey, we can't tell you who's searching, and what we can tell you though is it seems like there may be a need around this type of work that seems you all do. So we had a chance to go and explore our CRM and look for relationship history and opportunity history at that account. We found we had some pretty strong relationships, and just found kind of a natural way to touch base again and check in on what's going on at the organization to figure out if we can try to unwind the fact that there's something that we can do there. We found out there was a need. We ended up getting invited to a shortlisted RFP process and won it. And it was about a $500,000 project. So, for us last year, kind of our first year working with you all, it was a great ROI on our initial investment coming in. So yeah, I thought it was great.
Awesome. Yeah, I think a lot of times we all get this concept of like, okay, we want to get upstream, we want to start shaping the project, but we struggle with kind of how to do that. I know we're going to deep dive into kind of operations a little bit later, but I think this was an awesome example of like having some signal through Pavilion's platform of purchasing intent and then being able to kind of preempt and follow up And we'll share again a little bit later, but this has kind of shaped the next version of the product. So thanks, Ryan, for sharing that story. Shannon, I want to give you a chance to chime in here too, because I know we were kind of talking about, again, what does upstream actually look like in practice? And how do you kind of speak the language, equip your team to speak about, HGACBuy and other cooperative contracts as a way to differentiate your business and kind of start conversations versus just kind of close conversations as well. So wondering what, again, not to put you too much on the spot, but wondering what experience you can share here as well from the Robert Half side.
Yeah, I think, doing more with less, I'm a perfect example of that. I'm sort of one of one for the entire enterprise for the whole country. And our salespeople are not just focused on public sector. They're in all industries selling our products and services. And so we really, leverage kind of what you mentioned earlier and try to make it a two-prong approach when we're marketing to public sector clients. We look for that champion, that buyer that's going to buy the services. And our, sales professionals across the country, they know how to talk about that. And so essentially what I train them on is all you need to let them know is we have a cooperative contract. If we're marketing to HGACBuy members, we literally just say that's all that they need to know. And then they will whistle me in. I am the person that speaks procurement speak. And so, I'm able to do that back and forth with them, and they don't need to have all of the lingo and all of those things to be able to land the deal. And so we really try to just arm our people with just enough and to be dangerous, and then they whistle me in to have the legal conversation with the customer regarding the cooperative contract. So that's really how we've been getting upstream is we want the buyer to know that we have vehicles that make it really easy for them to partner with us without the need to go to RFP.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think, and we're going to talk again about this, but the what I'm hearing from both of you is that like upstream isn't just this like vague concept. It's a specific set of motions of like finding intent, having those conversations with your customers, picking up on signals before they show up in a solicitation that's kind of been written for someone else, and then identifying these different stakeholders within the organization, knowing who the champion is, the language and ways to have your sales force or team equip them to say, hey, we actually are differentiated because we have this contract vehicle. We can make procurement compliant and faster for you. And that's kind of a differentiator or a selling point as well in kind of crafting the solution together. And then really kind of being able to separate that solution conversation from the contracting conversation. And again, just using those cooperative contracts as the thing that makes you easy to work with, not just the thing that closes the deal at the end of the process. So appreciate you sharing that. I do want to jump in and especially Ryan, since you teed it up so nicely, share a bit of more context of how Pavilion helps with getting upstream of the RFP process and supports all of this. So I think let me show you what we've built at Pavilion to help suppliers actually do this kind of work. So just for context, for those who might be less familiar, Pavilion has a free platform that's used as the first stop for purchases by over 3,500 local and education agencies across the country. And our agency partners really configure Pavilion to be this user-friendly front door for procurement that procurement teams can then go share with their end user department. So again, this distinction of who are the champions, who are those end users, and then how much do they know about procurement versus who are the procurement kind of guardians of the process who intimately know all of the details about their agency's compliance rules and regulations. Got to engage both. And Pavilion's product solves this problem internally around collaboration for the agency where the end users can know, I just go here and every supplier I'm going to see when I start to source for a project or kick off a purchase is going to be one that my procurement team is not going to block me on. They're going to say yes to without having to go through an RFP. And then procurement teams also love it because they struggle so much with introducing and educating their end user departments about their procurement process. And they so often have to be the bad guys and reject work that their end users and sometimes their suppliers have done that's wrong pretty late in the cycle. So we help them say no less often and not have to rework things as often as well. So that's how we get embedded as a platform with public agencies across the country. And what it means for our supplier partners is that we're now using your cooperative contracts to drive warm leads at the beginning of the process instead of just help you use your contracts to close business or pipeline that your reps might already be managing. We do this in a couple of different ways. First, we're able to drive warm introductions directly through the platform. So that's when a public agency finds your business on Pavilion, decides to reach out. And again, the reason that they see you there in the first place is because you have contracts that meet their needs. You're an HGACBuy awarded vendor, you're in the platform already, so you're going to show up in this limited, less competitive pool as a result. And then second, and we just launched this, again, shout out Ryan for that feedback about that large project and the sort of motion that went in there, because what we realized is we also have all of this awesome access to buying intent and signal that's coming through our platform that we can share with suppliers so that you can actually action on getting upstream with really early purchase intent and know when an agency that's in market for what you sell is starting that process. So that's super early intent. You can reach out and start a conversation and also lead with your contracts at that perfect moment before your competitors even know that the agency is starting the process. So I want to just show you guys what that looks like. And again, Ryan, I'm picking on you and Protiviti here because you helped shape this product, which we're so grateful for. But just to give folks a sneak peek at what this looks like. So when I say opportunities or the live feed of agencies that are in market, what I'm talking about is basically being able to see the public agencies that are starting projects on Pavilion, what they're looking for, when they did it, and click in and reveal information and contact details about who that person is, their title, the department, how to get in touch with them, so that you can basically take this need that's starting as something that, in this case, this individual is starting a project related to consulting, super early, no public available intent about this project, just coming through Pavilion, and get in touch with this stakeholder in a way that hopefully is still relationship driven and doesn't feel too transactional, but where you introduce the business, you introduce your capabilities, and again, you can lead with those cooperative contracts as well as a differentiator. And again, depending, that was a stakeholder that I just shared that's in a end user department. So you can know, okay, that's a champion. I should say, hey, we have an easy button for this and not get too much into the weeds. Versus if it's the procurement team, that's the point where you really want to differentiate and get into the details of your HGACBuy contract as well. So super excited about this, really new product. And again, thanks Ryan for shaping and informing this product, but we're seeing some great results so far with our pro suppliers on the platform that are using it. Again, to action on this trend that we're talking about of how do you get upstream, not just preempt the RFP, but hopefully take the RFP off the street entirely, avoid the RFP entirely by talking about your contract. So that's a little bit about how we come into place. And again, I think the takeaway is contracts aren't just for closing anymore. I think the traditional use case was your customers already in procurement. It's a way to help equip your champion who you've been sort of cultivating over a period of time to close the deal. But now you can actually lead with the contract and actually get access to certain opportunities because you're a contract holder. So again, just the reframe here is that cooperative contracts aren't just a paperwork shortcut, they're a business development tool as well. So I think at this point, I know you wanted to ask some questions and shift gears.
Everything's great. Great information. I hope everybody's enjoying this best practices that you're hearing from Shannon and Ryan. But I just want to dive into some of the strategies, hearing some of the strategies and what you've done to become, we'll say, champions or the forerunners of the upstream. What have you all seen in your strategy to operations? With your team, do you structure your time to spend more in conferences, or tell me, what is your outreach efforts? What have you found out that is more inviting, more, we'll say, better for you all to be more successful versus going to conferences? What is your team spending more time on?
Yeah, I can jump in there. We certainly go to conferences on the Robert Half side of the house, but they're not cheap, and oftentimes you don't really get to spend a lot of quality time with a potential buyer. So the majority of what our marketing is just traditional email marketing, phone marketing, boots on the ground in the local market. And as I mentioned earlier, our teams are just focused on every single industry, not necessarily public sector. I do a training a few times a month for our sales folks on our cooperative contracts. And so I teach them sort of buzzwords and things that they can say to a buyer or a champion to get them to at least pick up the phone and listen to the sales pitch. And so that's really what I try to do is just arm them with those objections. Also objections on overcoming the RFP, because that's exactly what it is. It's just an objection to the sale. So essentially what I will just try to get them to do is they're going to go about their normal selling of their service. If they're selling technology staff augmentation to a technology leader, they're going to do that as they normally would. The caveat is that they're going to say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Client, you may or may not be aware of this, but you're actually a member of HGACBuy, and we've been awarded a competitively bid contract with HGAC that allows us to partner with you without the need to go to RFP. So they just need to know that one little phrase, and then that gets them in the door to have the conversation with the champion. Once the champion is bought in on the service, then that's when they know to sort of like whistle me in. And so I do those workshops a few times a month all across the country with our sales teams. And then they just know to whistle me in. They'll send me objections that they're getting, things like that. So hopefully that answers your question. But
Yeah,
less of
absolutely.
the trade shows, if you will, and more of
Yeah,
just the proactive selling of the cooperative. In addition, Pavilion has been really helpful to sort of create the awareness with the procurement teams. So each state is a little bit different in terms of their procurement laws. And
sure.
oftentimes they just want to see how did you set up this HGAC contract with another entity in California? I'm in California. I need to know to make this work for me as a California entity. And so Pavilion can play a role in that as well, which has been really helpful.
They want to see the blueprint, essentially. They want to see your blueprint to see exactly how did you capture that sale and close the deal, right? So with that being said, are there any other tools that you utilize that are stacked up against the co-ops? Or do you actually just have those frank conversations that, hey, we have HGAC buy, they're available, and you pull up the member list and say you are actually a member and close the deal? Or do you have any other tools in your toolkit?
As far as, I mean, we have tons of sales tools, Salesforce.
Got
We
it.
have a lot of analytics and things like that, but we have AI add-ons into Salesforce that we utilize. But I would say primarily what we're doing is just if they're already a member of HGAC, that's low-hanging fruit for us. And oftentimes they're really thankful that I can't tell you how many times I've had even a champion or a stakeholder thank me for bringing the cooperative to the fact that they're a member of the cooperative to the forefront. So it's a value add. So I would say that those are probably the biggest tools that all we need is the cooperative, and once you get one in a particular state on board, it's just really easy to recreate it, over and over again.
Answer the other question I had for you. I was going to say, tell me what focus and decision has actually paid off. You just answered it by mentioning the co-op, the HGAC by Cooperative Purchasing Program. It's paid off. And let me ask you this on the flip side. What has not paid off? If you go to someone, what has not paid off? What has been your outrage, your cry, your pain points when you're just trying to
The
drive
graveyard.
home? But yeah, on the flip side, I just want to know for the audience if I'm sure they have questions, or if they haven't asked, or something in their head that they would like to know. What has not paid off on the flip side of the co-op?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, RFPs where we have no relationships, and we're competing against just the lowest price, then
Sure.
it's that when we even have a process, because we get this from salespeople all over the country. I probably receive 9 RFPs a day from various salespeople all over the country, and they're like, "Oh, look what I have," and they bring it to me, and it's we don't have any relationships yet there. We don't have the price is weighted very heavily on the
Yes.
RFP, and it's going to take us a lot of resources that
Mhm.
we have to pay for. We have 2 RFP writers for the entire country for public sector, but they also support some of our private sector businesses as well, or customers as well. And if we don't have the relationship, we almost never win, and it's really time consuming. And so that would
Sure.
be
Sure.
something that I'm constantly trying to train people. I'm like, why don't we do this instead of like responding to this RFP is a giant waste of everyone's time, and
Right.
and we're not going to win. So I would say that would be I beat that drum all the time for our sales teams across
One last question. It just went off. When you say RFP, we all understand what an RFP means, right? And what it stands for. But do you
Really
include your
freaking painful,
corporate?
right? Is that
I
what it
know,
stands for?
right? Do you include the HGAC by cooperative purchasing program that you're awarded with your RFP to make that stand out? Because there are times where the champion or the decision maker says, you know what? Wow, they just responded. They have a co-op. Oh, we need to call them right away. I mean, have you had that success where it eliminates them, well, we'll say them, the member having to go through the entire bidding process, paperwork process, or did they say, you know what? You answered our prayer. Thanks for responding. You're part of HGAC Cooperative Person Program. Does that help speed up that process at times?
Yes, yes. And I think to what Ryan had mentioned earlier too, right, is that oftentimes those RFPs are canceled within the Q&A piece of it. And so yes, there are absolutely times where we use HGAC as we'll use it as our pricing strategy in terms of if we have to submit to an RFP, of course, that's going to be some things that you're going to have to do that from time to time as part of your public sector practice, but it can oftentimes be a way to get in the door from a pricing strategy. Or in my mind, it's why have they canceled, right? If we're asking about,
Mm,
we
True,
almost
yes.
always ask about if they have a specific pricing model. What about a cooperative contract? Would you be open to that? And so who's to say that it's not canceled because they're, oh, well, we have co-ops here. We don't need to go through this. And
mm.
then we end up getting a call from those people anyway. So to answer your question, yes, that is a great tactic from time to time as well.
Thanks for sharing that. So, folks, you've heard the sauce. I don't think she'll allow everybody in her kitchen to cook with her, but she did definitely give you a little bit of additional sauce for your recipe. Include your corporate purchasing awarded contracts to these RFPs. It sounds like it's a winner at times. So, with that being said, that's all I have for you. It's been great. Mariel, I'm gonna hand it back to you to take it
Yeah.
over and keep it moving.
Awesome. Thanks. Well, a couple of thoughts that I wanted to follow up on and pull on some of those threads, Shannon, and I know Ryan, even though Robert Half is the mothership, I know you guys have your own way of organizing business too. So definitely want to hear from you here too on how things are evolving. I do think one of the things that came up or came to mind too as we are talking about tools is I think this landscape is continuing to rapidly change and evolve. And so as we see more folks engaging or trying to get upstream, I think some of these channels are going to also change in terms of efficacy as well over the next couple of years. I think one trend we're watching and certainly hear a lot about from our supplier partners is all of and Shannon, you mentioned it too, all of the sort of AI tools and capabilities that are making it so much less expensive and accessible to get access to publicly available information that wasn't so easy to access before. So meeting minutes or a PO or something like that that would have taken a lot of FOIA work in the past. The time and cost of that is coming down. But it also means public agencies are getting so much more outreach from so many more people that are saying, "Hey, I saw in a meeting minute you're buying this thing." So again, I think there's these moments to have these early mover advantages and try new tactics. But then obviously as those channels become more crowded or investment shift, we got to keep up with the pace. So Ryan, I guess would love to, before we switch it over to bets and future looking, which I know I started down that path, would love to give you a chance to share a little bit more if you have anything else to add to on top of what Shannon shared from the Robert Half perspective about how Protiviti is organized and some of the go-to-market channels you're using, some of the way the team is organized, tools that you're investing in. What are some of the changes and trends or bets that you've made over the last couple of years?
Yeah, so great question. And I'll maybe focus on a couple of things. With regard to tools and the information that's out there now, I think we certainly we pay for some tools that give us access to town hall minutes and things like that, aggregators, so to speak. We're also building some of our own tools. And on the RFP front, we're building some tools that help us analyze those things and do the initial funnel or filter to our teams so that we can save our solution and delivery teams from having to wade through too many unnecessary RFPs. So yes, we can go after more RFPs, but that requires more people, more work. And then yes, there are tools now that can help accelerate that. I think one of the challenges is now it almost feels like it's AI talking to AI.
Totally.
So
Agree.
a
Yeah.
lot of the RFPs have been written leveraging AI, which is great. They
Yeah.
should, and we certainly use it in our process,
Yeah.
and we use it during Q&A to make sure we're uncovering the questions that we wouldn't have thought of. And I think clients are using AI to answer the questions that often came from AI. But I think what's
Yeah.
happening
Yes.
is pretty soon you're going to have it's really just the agents talking to each other. And so you've got to find a way to cut through the noise and you've got to find other avenues. I'm trying to think of where I saw this or somebody on Twitter X who had this prediction. They said cell phones and email and text are going to become so immersed in spam that they will be
Mm,
rendered basically unusable in the next
mm.
couple of years. And I think
You
there
sure
will.
that's not now, Ryan? You sure
I
that's
just
not happening now?
wait. But I think on the public agency side, a similar process is going to start playing out because it becomes the barriers are being removed to find the RFPs and to respond to the RFPs.
Mm,
And what I think will take place in the next several years is that cooperative purchasing, these cooperative purchasing contracts are going to become much more valuable because I think it's just going to become noise on the RFP front. If you
mm,
don't you have a relationship, you're going to be competing against 100 other different
mm,
agencies, big, small, medium, all different sizes because they can all respond now. So
mm,
the public agencies are not going to want to keep having to sift through that. And
mm.
so I think it just puts more and more pressure on us to figure out, well, what are the other channels? And more on the public agencies to figure out what are the other channels so we
Yeah.
don't have to go through this painful RFP process. So the co-ops are great. And then I think you asked about other channels as well. And for us, partnerships, ecosystem partners are certainly a big part
Hmm.
of this. And where that comes together is we'll talk with one of our technology ecosystem partners and we'll say, are you on this contract? They'll ask the same, are you on this
Mm,
contract? And that becomes a bit of the dance and is this a good match for us? Because we need one of us to be on that contract
mm.
in
Yeah.
order for this to work. So that becomes even part of that conversation as well.
Mm, yeah, awesome. Well, I
Nice.
know we started looking ahead a little bit to the future, and I totally hear you on, hey, it just feels like all of this is like AI writing the bids, responding to bids, writing your cold emails, responding to your cold emails. So we'll see how that continues to evolve. But I think just to close it out before we open it up more broadly to questions, and this is always one of my favorite parts of any conversation, but I'd love to hear from you on one bet you're placing right now, or an experiment, a new motion, a hypothesis about where the market is going. If we get back together in a couple of years for the same conversation, what do you think you'll sort of be talking about as, hey, this thing has changed a lot, or this is something that really paid off? So Shannon, would you like to kick us off? And then Ryan will let you close this out.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. I would say I'm willing to bet that cooperative purchasing will continue to grow in popularity for many of the reasons that we mentioned. I think, Ryan, the AI piece that you're talking about, the same thing happens to our clients with resumes being done by AI. And you think it's so much easier to apply. They have so many more resumes to sift through. So same thing with RFPs. So I'm willing to bet that cooperative purchasing will continue to rise in popularity. One sort of experiment that I'm trying to leverage with our own Pavilion account is really starting to create a story state by state on how that cooperative is working for that particular
Mm,
state. And so if we can
Okay.
show a few examples of that, then it sort of creates that story state by state. So
yeah.
I'm
Absolutely.
willing to bet that Pavilion will play a big part in helping us to do that.
Awesome. Yeah, there's a lot
Like
of
that.
opportunities for more personalization, better social proof. We're seeing that in the product as well. And also simplifying the procurement storyline, which is a big theme that we're investing in as well. Ryan?
Well, I'd probably use the example that I just gave. I think it's that important. I think RFPs are going to become spam, and I think
Spicy. That's a hot take.
I I do
Like that.
on all fronts.
Yeah.
I think the cooperatives are going to be in other channels that are going to become increasingly more important and
Mm,
more work. I think the big shift is more work will flow through cooperatives than flow through
mm,
RFPs in the next several years.
yeah.
And I'll just give one other example because I just thought of this. We had a university who reached out for an opportunity, and yeah, it was a local one here in St. Louis, and we responded back with some answers to their questions, and we got responses back from our questions almost immediately, and with the comparison against the other vendor responses that they had gotten back, so you could tell this procurement officer was taking the vendor responses, throwing them into Copilot or ChatGPT or Cloud or whatever
Yeah.
they use, and saying, "All right, identify the gaps." We got the gaps back immediately, and it felt very impersonal.
Mm,
Could you wait a day and maybe make it look like you analyzed rather than throwing them through a machine? But I think that's where we're headed. More and more
yeah.
machines are going to be processing and scoring these opportunities that end up going through these routes, and that's great. They should be leveraged to a great extent, but you got to find other ways in the door.
Yeah, yeah, makes
Absolutely.
sense. Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. I think we covered a lot of
Yes.
ground. I think at a very high level, it sounds like we're all quite bullish on the role that cooperative contracting will play and continue to play, especially as we make it easier to have end users and those champions access cooperative procurement through tools like Pavilion. I think the reorientation of teams to simply responding to RFPs, as you said, Ryan, which are increasingly automated and maybe less helpful. Shannon, I know you're sort of, hey, that's the channel that's been less useful and valuable for us, and more to shifting upstream and new tactics strategies for how do we get ahead of that process? How do we break through the noise? Have a timely introduction or conversation, or Ryan, in the case that you described, leverage some of our existing relationships to get a warm intro to the right decision maker, even if we know who that decision maker is. How do we have that conversation, cut through the noise? So a lot of exciting stuff, a lot of change in the last couple of years, and a heck of a lot more
Absolutely.
to come. So really, thank you, Shannon, Ryan, you for joining this conversation. It was a pleasure to dig in with you, and for our
Yes.
supplier friends that are tuning in and listening, thanks for joining us. I know we're at time, and I didn't see any questions come through, so I think we'll let
Yep.
folks part. But please do reach out. We'll send a recap of this conversation and a recording as well. And I'm sure Ryan and Shannon would be happy. I know you and I already are, but to be in touch and share more if you guys have
Yes.
additional questions as well.
Thanks for
So
having us.
thank you all
It's been great.
for
Thank
joining us.
you.
Thanks for having
All
us.
right.
Thank you all.
Have a good one.
Have a
We'll
great
see you
day.
later. Bye.